Hi, this is Joe Ziemba, the host of When Football Was Football here on the Sports History Network. Aside from my podcasting duties, I'm also a sports collector. And as such, I'm very pleased to share the exciting news that the Sports History Network has partnered with Rochester Sports Autographs, the largest JSA authenticated autograph distributor in the United States, where you can get deals on over 30,000 autograph sports collectibles. So as a collector, I was very pleased when I visited the site of Rochester Sports Autographs. The massive inventory is easy to search, carefully documented, and visually appealing. The options seem limitless, whether you're looking for an autographed baseball, signed football helmets, or basketball jerseys, among thousands of others. I found everything from a Babe Ruth autograph, a signed football by Dick Butkus, and an autographed Larry Bird basketball jersey. And as a collector, you'll be delighted with the very competitive pricing on JSA authenticated products. Made possible since RSA deals directly with athletes, so there's no extra markup, and the savings are passed on directly to the customer. Perhaps you're looking for an early gift for Mother's Day or Father's Day. Heck, who needs a holiday as an excuse to give a piece of sports history to your loved ones? Or how about yourself? Today seems like a great day to add to your own sports collection, right? RSA even has film, music, and other entertainment autographs on the site, so there's something for everyone. All orders from Rochester Sports Autographs are top quality and shipped to your door with top authentication and a money-back guarantee. And to make sure RSA knows that the Sports History Network sent you, we created a special link for you. All you need to do is head to shoprsa.com/SHN. That's shoprsa.com/SHN to get your own piece of sports history today.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. On September 24th, 2007, the television show Big Bang Theory aired on CBS, launching a new era into making science cool again. This week's guest surely can appreciate this, considering his background. However, he was probably watching something else this night because it was Monday night and the Tennessee Titans were coming into town to face against his New Orleans Saints. Welcome to Fantasy Football Origin Stories, where each episode is a journey back in time to explore the unique experiences of some of the coolest and most influential people in the fantasy football industry. I'm your host, Arnie Chapman, also known as the Football History Dude. Now, I love fantasy football, and I want you to come along with me to explore the yesteryear of the armchair gridiron. So hop on board my DeLorean, and let's get this baby up to 88 miles per hour.
Great Scott!
This time's just about the DeLorean. The date is September 24th, 2007, and we're at the Louisiana Superdome on Monday night, getting ready to watch the New Orleans Saints take on the Tennessee Titans with our new buddy and guest for this week's show, John Bush, future co-host of Science of Fantasy Football. However, that's in the future, because this is the first year that John got into fantasy football, or at least we believe, and the Saints are his favorite team. Unfortunately for him, it would not turn out well because the Saints ended up losing to the Titans 31-14 and ultimately falling to an 0-3 record on the season. Perhaps John does wish that he would have watched the premiere of Big Bang Theory after all. But I digress, and instead, we'll hop back on that DeLorean and come back to 2023 because we're going to learn more about science of fantasy football with this week's guest, John Bush. Dr. John Bush, that is, a real-life scientist. And we'll get into that in this interview, but if you want to learn more about John and his work, the fantasy football side of things that is, you can head over to scienceoffantasyfootball.com, or you can check out his YouTube channel by typing in Fantasy Football Science Professor. I'll tell you what, learning the scientific method never sounded so cool. But for now, let's get into the interview with Dr. John Bush. The first question I'm really going to ask you, John, is taking you back in my DeLorean, take me back to the time of you Like your first memory of either playing or participating in fantasy football.
So the first time I was invited into a fantasy football league was a fellow PhD, a geologist. There was a group over at the medical school, so MDs, PhD types, and the league was called Science Hell. So you were against all these, I guess, smart folks, MD, PhDs. And so they said, hey, we're playing fantasy football. Didn't know anything about it. So I got baptized into it. I think it was about 2007 and loved it. All the metrics, the data and everything started my journey, but it took a while. And then I pretty much did so well. I won so many years from those guys that I was unofficially asked, give others a shot. So I left the league and I've moved on to bigger and better things. But that's where I cut my teeth, was the old Science Hell Fantasy Football League way back. It was Fanball, or I don't even remember some of the websites we were on for a while. But that started it off. Didn't know anything about it. But as a biologist, as a scientist, having trained since the 70s, data analysis, stats, forecasting, it all came naturally. Of course, these were sharp folks too, so they had those same background skills. So it was kind of mano a mano against really smart folks.
Do you remember who what your team was? Cause like your core or your new?
Yeah. My team was called the Whackers, since my last name is Bush. It's the Bushwhackers. So just the Whackers. And, that was part of the, entry, was the other members of the league got to name you something off your name. So I didn't pick my name. It was picked for me. So I was the Whackers.
Was it like so was it an in-person draft? Did you do like the online thing?
We did an online thing.
So give me maybe your top 3 players from that year, if you can remember them.
I remember that the quarterback position was skewed because it was 6 points for passing touchdown instead of 4. And it was 1 point per 10 yards. In other words, it was kind of, if you looked at the previous way they scored, quarterbacks were worth more than traditional. So I probably grabbed a quarterback early, probably first or second round, because I didn't know any difference there, and really, didn't know it. I don't know if it was Rodgers. I probably could have been Drew Brees. I'm a big Saints fan, so it might have been him back in the day. So I know I had Rodgers early on when he started in that league. I think I left in 2012 or 13, but probably Drew Brees. I'm going to say Drew Brees was the one I remember a lot. And maybe maybe Marcus Colston or somebody to pair up with Brees, kind of that stack concept that I really wasn't even aware of. I was kind of a Saints homer, so maybe Deuce McAllister or somebody like that.
Yeah, I'd see that, especially when you first starting off. You kind of like do a lot of homer picks and everything, and that was the year. So Brady, when he threw for 50 touchdowns, so if you're 6 point passing, that team won the league, I'm sure.
You wasn't my team.
Well, either way, okay. So, let's then transition into, before we get into like your origin for the science of fantasy football. Like, what's your greatest memory as a fantasy football owner?
Greatest memory. Probably repeating in that league. I think the comment was nobody's ever repeated in the history. And apparently the history of this league went back to where they were having to use paper and, that kind of thing. It wasn't online or anything. It was kind of done by paper and scoring. And so a lot of the people apparently had changed a lot over the years. So this was it's still going now, but I think they'd been going for a long time in, pencil and paper league that morphed into, the online. But that was my earliest memory when I doubled up and carried the league, twice. So that was, pretty good for me.
So as a player, then, I mean, you said initially, like, okay, you have a propensity, of course, with your background being a PhD and everything as a scientist. Is it just analytics, looking at stats, projections, or do you factor in like on-field, we'll call variables?
Nowadays, I am interested in cognitive biases. Okay. I am interested in decision making under uncertainty. So I have really branched out, tried to teach myself behavioral economics, kind of catching up in other fields, kind of why we do what we do, how we're fooled by randomness, trying to understand that we are easily tricked by what we see and easily swayed by sensational activities and things that we note. And, we're biased against, because of these issues. I mean, we're humans. Our ancestors, the fight or flight, if the weeds moved, you jumped up the tree. The ones that move the weeds what is that? And the saber-tooth got them. They're gone. So our ancestors were up the tree, and if it was the wind, okay, no harm. They came down and moved on. But, we have that in us. And that type of thinking kind of overrides our Spock brains, I want to call it. So we have kind of the fight or flight thinking versus the logical, and the logic takes back seat to jumping up the tree. And so it's a constant battle between those systems of thinking. Thinking Fast and Slow is the book that you should read. Talks about the two levels of thinking. I've read that several times, that book. Fooled by Randomness is another book that I would recommend. So those would be two key books that I would use to at least illustrate what I'm trying to do now. So beyond analytics, using the science method, gathering data, making hypotheses, and trying to figure out a way to test it, right? The science method, and then finding a new finding, and then testing that. So questions and letting that drive the research. So if there's on-field variables, they would be part of the data that I'm taking, and they would, try to shoehorn them into some further questions that I have. And I'm deep into questions right now in my research. I'm probably working 8 hours a week or so, been working that way for the last month or so on, looking at last season and trying to understand what happened.
That reminds me of the, we'll call it, like, I've been burned by a player before. Just use Christian McCaffrey this past year as an example, because he was injured and everybody, injury prone. He's labeled injury prone. And if you didn't we're not willing to take him. I mean, look what he had, an excellent, I mean, I don't know where he landed. I think number 2 or 3 is running back, but yeah, that right there, that whole, was it a saber tooth or just the wind kind of thing?
Yeah. If you look historically, in fact, just talked about this on our podcast, Science of Fantasy Football.com. Check us out. He did, if you look historically from 2000 on, I'm going to pull up the spreadsheet. He did by my data, like 356 fantasy points. And that's 6 years out of experience. Nobody, running backs tend to stay about the same or go down over time. He did something that just hasn't been done. Somebody like LaDainian Tomlinson would be another example. It is so rare, maybe Matt Forte. We're talking a handful of players over the last 23 years have ever done anything like that historically. So it was something that we may go a while before we see that kind of performance again. He really moved up kind of in that pantheon of greats by having that kind of season, kind of a, and I would love to see him have the longevity of somebody like an Adrian Peterson. I'm looking, and he did well in his 7th year. It's like he got hurt in 8. Looks like 9th year he did pretty good too. So maybe 3 more years out of CMC. That would be so great, especially in Dynasty if you have him. Redraft, I would not shy away from him, but, at some point, age catches up with everybody. So just, cautious. I wouldn't overpay, but I wouldn't, ignore him either. So whatever that means, you're going to have to decide for yourself, this summer or whenever you draft, the ADP, what's value. And that becomes a really interesting question. If you want to figure out a question, Arnie, ask everybody what they consider value, because in this industry, nobody really can tell you exactly what value means. People's got all sorts of definitions, and the advantage of science and data science, there are scientists get together, form a society, decide what are definitions and procedures and processes, and they're decided on. In fantasy, we don't have that. It's anybody jumps on and screams loud enough, they can have their own process and definition. And so what an expert is another problem. And I wrote an article, The Expert Problem in Fantasy Football, and you can look into that. And not claiming I'm an expert, because I'm an expert in biology, actually microbiology, actually eukaryotic microbiology. Actually, I study an amoeba about that. And so I'm very narrow and deep in my focus. That's what scientists are, but that's an issue you will find, and that will haunt a lot of people, because they will see something, especially if you're just a casual fan, and somebody will say value or it's their season or bust, and you'll think you understand what that means, but there's definitions that are not defined by the community. There's no organization in the community, so it varies. And so you're kind of on your own trying to figure out what things like that mean.
Yeah, I mean, you're able to put a different light, or I guess a perspective, on using the scientific method than just the standard. I'll just use me as a fantasy football fan. Like, I watch the guys on the field, I look at the stats, and I go, man, that dude's going to have a good year. But you had something, I guess we'll call it, at some point, your eureka moment, I guess. Hopefully it wasn't just like the guy who had the eureka moment in the bathtub and ran down the streets. but I don't know if these fans have,
Archimedes.
Yeah, there's the guy's name. I was trying to remember what it was. I talked about him on my football history show a while back as like but I couldn't remember what the name was. So at any rate, how about go take us back to the DeLorean moment, the Eureka moment, whatever it is, for when you said, I'm going to have science of fantasy football, and run me through the timeline up until today on fantasy football origin stories.
Okay, so after kind of getting kicked out of science hell, I was bad. Very few people make it out of hell, and I did. So I started a blog, actually, and I was probably up there still somewhere. And I started applying my stats to it the first year. I actually wrote a textbook. It was like 2,000 or 3,000 pages of my data and whatnot. And it is overkill. And I realized that I've come full circle to realize I'm overkill, and very few are going to really have to, that just nobody's interested in getting as deep as me. So it's all my personal satisfaction of my own journey and figuring things out. And I hope by teaming with my partner in crime, D. Mike, that he's a meteorologist, that we impart at least some of our processes, right? I think I sent you my professor's process and kind of my tenets. And one of them is trying to educate people to be a scholar on the data and learn what they can in their time frame, right? Not everybody's going to do it. That's fine. I'm not going to take your gold star away, right? I'm going to encourage everybody to learn, right? And to explore. That was my origin, in the sense that that's what I want to do, is turn people into a scholar, right? That's what PhDs do. If you have graduate students, you kind of clone them. You make them you, and their process is the way they approach science and problems. And so I hope that the few that are listening to me, and I have video lessons as well on the site. I have a YouTube site as well called The Process. And I talk about these things that I'm doing, and maybe people can learn a little bit and help their game. So whether it's just kind of, touch a little bit or get really deep, as much as I am deep, I'm hoping I can help people move to that next step and at least realize, there is something behind the curtain, and maybe be a little bit more cautious when they see things like bust or, value, and just, what's that really mean? Is that really true? Just to be a little bit more questioning. If I can do that, that would be good. So I know it, there's no money in this, it's just something. As an educator, I've been teaching students and graduate students since the 80s. And so it's just, I like to teach and do research. I'm a researcher who likes to teach, and that's fun for me. So I think I got off topic, Arnie, and I apologize. That's just the professor in me.
That's okay. So it actually, as you were talking,
so reformulate your question. Yeah.
Reformulate. I have to reformulate it, come back to the hypotheses, and let you break it down. So I was just thinking, as you were talking there, it's almost like in the marketing world, they call it puffery. When someone says we're the world's greatest, whatever gadget, gizmo, it's not that it's provable. It's nothing. It's just marketing aspect. And that's the same thing as, like, you could say bust or stuff. It's just words that maybe get people to start kind of the buzzwords that make them think about something or put you above. And you mentioned earlier the guy that talks the loudest, or maybe the person that has, a really good comedy routine as part of their fan, the stuff that people pay attention to versus just maybe digging further deep into it. So what can, if someone, because you said that, who wants to read this massive thesis potentially, but what can somebody do through your site or through other personal research? Like, what would you suggest the newcomer to wanting to take the approach of science of fantasy football?
Yeah, I would probably have somebody, if they were just starting out, there's probably sites to just understand the limits of the game and how to play it. So our site is probably a little bit more kind of that next second or third step. So if you've had a little experience, just come to the site, listen to my lessons, and just try to catch some of it. And I believe in my process. I talk about. I'm pulling up the professor's process. So I call it use of a textbook philosophy. My material is quickly read. I mean, you could scan it quickly, right? I don't know if people read for, how they're taught to read anymore, but it's slowly understood. So you're going to have to break it down and read it a couple times and then kind of go away and come back and read it again. My second, and these are bullet points. If you just want to go and look at my process, it's beyond what you need today, right? If you're just starting, but I want to inspire your research. I do research in the sense to make me learn more and push me. So you're getting the results of my journey anyway. I'm doing stuff I would do anyway, and I'm just putting it out there. It's pretty easy in fantasy to get kind of lazy and let things just kind of slide because you really don't get any feedback until the end of the season. So there's a lot of slow feedback. It's not like you stick your finger in the light socket. You get feedback instantly, right? You put your hand, you're a little kid, and little kids are scientists, by the way. So raising my daughter, if she was in the high chair and would throw food over and look at it, she was testing gravity. And I understand that. So in fantasy, you might use some free leagues and just do some experiments and see what your things are and get you some feedback. But it's going to take a while to get that instant feedback. You should never use week to week in feedback because you'll miss more of the long term. Fantasy football is the complete season. If you're, traditional, I understand daily fantasy and we're talking quarter by quarter or play by play. But for the traditional, redraft league, it's, you get feedback at the end of the year. Did you make the playoffs? To me, make the playoffs is good feedback. You did something right. It's not the easiest way to present the information, Artie. But it's my way. You will not master everything I have laid out. Just accept it. This is not something that you can look at, whatever it is. You can't learn to be, when you learn to drive a car, right? You just can't watch somebody. You can't get in and back up down the driveway and expect, okay, I know how to drive now. You've got to practice. You've got to get feedback and go through different, a snowstorm. What about a wet road? Think about you as a kid. Your parents were just worried to death you were getting in a car because you had never seen everything that you could potentially run into on the road. And if I handed it to everybody, right, it's not the same as you working for it, right? I mean, people talk about helicopter parents, and if you do everything for your kids, wiping them up at the end of the day, that really doesn't help them learn. So I try not to hand feed, just kind of, here I am, this is what I'm doing. And remember, most people in this, creators, they have sites, they get clicks, and they would rather you come back and not learn anything, just listen to their opinions, right? Because that makes them money. And so I'm trying to wean folks off of that and try to inspire life. Here it is, inspire lifelong scholarship in an inquiry-driven fantasy football research. And I don't know if I lost you or not.
Nope, I'm still here. So that's a good point. In my other show, Football History Dude, so I talked to a professor that he teaches various history, American history, worldwide history, such, and he even has it where he has one class that's called American Football History, and you can get college credit for it. And he does that through the lens of teaching his students football. They think they're learning something really cool and interesting, football history, but then of course in each particular course, whatever you call it, module, I guess you could say, he's explaining like how the social impact of World War II and maybe rubber rationing, and then how the players turned into this type of protocol because of, losing so many players of the war. Like he'll through the lens of, like for you, through the lens of fantasy football, but learning the scientific method and learning a lot of other things in life that they can gain. So I appreciate that.
Artie, just to let you know, I haven't told you, my dad was a history professor for 30-something years, and I actually took him for American history, and I never set the curve. I was like number 2 or 3, so he chewed my butt because I wasn't number 1. But I actually audited his favorite advanced history was diplomatic history, looking at treaties and, early American history and using the eyes of diplomacy. And he had a textbook, and I read the textbook. And so I did that for fun as well. But he told me early on, there's no money in history, so go do something else. So I end up getting my degree in zoology and starting as a biologist.
So, I mean, before I'm going to move on to the a couple other questions, sure, but I do want to ask you, make sure you tell the listener, we talked about your site and your work. Give the name of the website again, but also where else could the listener of the show get in touch with you if they're interested?
Yeah, so it is Science of Fantasy Football.com. It's all one word. So it's www.scienceoffantasyfootball.com. I am on Twitter, as most everybody should be. And my home is, my Twitter handle is at Prof, P-R-O-F _fantasy1. I guess I don't know if there is a Professor Fantasy no number, but I was Professor _fantasy1, and that is, and you can follow our podcast. We do in season. We're doing 3 podcasts a week, Arnie. We do a Wednesday, kind of a Friday, Saturday, and we for frequency's sake, as kind of a sister website, and we do something called Data Lab. Dennis and I do Data Lab, and so during season we're talking a lot here, and my partner in crime is DMC Media, so it's at DMIC Media, all one word on Twitter. And Dennis is quite an interesting character as well. And so together we are the scienceoffantasyfootball.com folks. Is that what you needed?
Oh, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted. So, like, if the listener wanted to interact with you, ask you questions, but then also to get to your websites, thank you for also including Dennis in here. We'll have to put all that stuff in the show notes.
Dennis would be a great, as a meteorologist, he's had, history of meteorology, and you guys would have a great time. And he's into NASCAR and ultimate fantasy, Frisbee. he calls that the Chicago. What's the name? Chicago has a professional Frisbee team, and he's their announcer. At least he was last summer, and they did good this year. So if you're in that area, I guess you may. Apparently, you go out to the field and watch them. I don't know if they hit each other with a Frisbee. I don't know how to play that game. They don't have it down here in Arkansas. I would not go in the woods here in Arkansas and throw things. You're liable to be mistaken for a deer or something. So, folks right here are pretty serious. Anything moving in the woods, no, I'm obviously playing to the hillbilly stereotype. I was born in Arkansas, lived in Louisiana most of my life, so I can kind of make fun of Arkansas.
Well, no, I appreciate it. We'll have to get Dennis on the show too. I know that. So you're really, I guess we'll call it your superpowers. Your Marvel on the back of your cape, is the scientific method and breaking down, analyzing from a different angle.
Yes.
And I know, okay, so you're not one to say, well, I'm just going to give you a list of players and not explain anything, because that's what a lot of people are looking for. However, give me your Mount Rushmore of maybe players that you planted your flag on over your career. I guess I'm using air quotes your career because I know it's not being for paid. Wow. But your Mount Rushmore of players you planted your flag on.
Wow. Well, I remember last year, and Dennis and I were really in on the sun god. We really, in a lot of my leagues, we really loved him. Amon-Ra, we were all in on him. Jalen Hurts is the rushing quarterback. That is this phenomenon. We saw it, early on. It kind of died down, and now we're fully back historically into that. He brings so many points, him and some other ones, to the table. And I talk about that in my data, and I'll be, recapping all the quarterbacks. So I tend to probably plant my flag on wide receivers and quarterbacks, and of course tight end. Everybody knew Kelsey, and I was wrong on Mark Andrews and Kyle Pitts. I was, it's one of these, hope he gets better, hope it's a better situation. And, I'm kind of, my human side is, I was depressed for his output last year. It made me sad because I felt like there was so much talent, and he's not the only one. The people are surrounding some of these good players kind of mask what those good players can do. So you always look carefully at players changing teams. I always want to hope that it's a better opportunity. And so maybe I'm an optimist there, especially if you can draft them cheap. And I'm going to, here I am talking about definitions, and I'm putting that word cheap in quotes because it's only cheap to me, right? There is no universal standard definition for value or cheap or bust, but in my head, cheap. So as far as running backs, I took Taylor. When I had the first draft, I took CMC, I took Eckler, just, kind of whatever was given to me early. And then if, the top 3 or 4, I took Henry. So I was kind of hit and miss on some of those. But running backs are so much different than wide receivers on longevity. And I've got all that data laid out, and we can look at, kind of trends that have been happening. So last year it was Amon-Ra for my favorite, and I really thought Brandon Cooks was going to do well. Dante Johnson, I really was drafting all I could, so I hit 1 out of 3, out of the park, and the other ones kind of limped along for me. I don't know how to quantify bad team, great player concept. I don't know if there's a way to get a handle on that question, and people get tricked by that. It's kind of like, the fire never gets to burn as bright as you know it could. And that's a hard thing to live with as a fantasy player, as they got talent and they're just not able to show it. And that really is frustrating for me and others. I'm sure we all have that frustration. So, but that was last year. Previous years, Hardy, I kind of like etch or sketch. I shake it and I'm done with that year. You can go look at our past and some of our articles, and you can see what we're working on. But I'm not a dynasty player. Dennis is heavily into dynasty. So, I suck at dynasty. I mean, I have one team. I have let Dennis take over. I told him I paid the fee and he's my manager because I suck. I should be in the corner with the dunce hat. I am not strong. And so I would urge people listening, if you find your weakness, unless you got plenty of time, why don't you soar with your strengths instead? Don't soar with your weaknesses. In other words, if you're not good at dynasty, don't take on 10 new teams in dynasty and expect something to change a lot, right? If you're good at redraft, stick to it. Or if you're good at superflex, stick to, or whatever it is you're good at, find it through your diary. I'm a big proponent of diaries. I have a whole article you can go look about how to make a diary, and then people can see what they're good at. And I'll give you an example. This year, 2023, I am going to draft more in August than I've ever done. Turns out a lot of my championships I won were those I was drafting either very early. I hit 2 or 3 like in May and maybe early June, but I sucked from about late June, July. I was worthless. All my leagues blew up. I mean, I made some playoffs, but I'm actually talking about getting paid. It was my August teams mainly where I got paid a little bit early. So my diary told me that I probably am, something's going on with me as a human, probably too much noise. In June and July, everybody's shouting from the rooftops, and I think that muddles my thinking. At least that's my hypothesis. So I'm going to be changing based on my diary, and we'll see what happens. I urge everybody to, if they didn't do one last year, if it's too late, go and look at your league, look at how you drafted, look at your weekly. Who did you pick up? Who did you drop? Just kind of start putting that down. Are you good at picking up tight ends, like a streaming tight end or a quarterback? Or do you suck at that? You need to know so you can structure your league in 2023 to try to be a little better. That's the learning process. Use your diary.
You basically just normally gave me what I would end with the drop the mic moment, but I wanted to still play a little bit of a game with you. So we're going to do that. It's another DeLorean moment, man. You're going to go into the future, and this is going to be not about trying to pick players. It's not about trying to pick anything else. It's going to be more from the strategic perspective. In 20 years, what do you think is going to be different about fantasy football, or what could you see be different about fantasy football than it is today?
I'm wondering if we don't have some type of virtual fantasy football, kind of historical fantasy football, where they take data from past seasons and players and put that into a format that you can draft LaDainian Tomlinson again, but under these conditions, or, I think AI and whatnot will allow us to construct virtual teams, predictive based on historical models, and people can be playing fantasy 24/7, 365. I think there'll still be football. I don't know if it'll be flag football. I don't know I know, concussions and things. I don't know if there'll be, maybe 100 years now, be robots playing instead of humans, but, something like some dystopian thing, right? Hunger Games, right? People will play for life and death stakes on the football field. I think it's a scary moment that's why people like those Hunger Games. And Stephen King wrote a book called The Long Walk about a game where everybody just walked, and if you stopped and, they pretty much shot you and moved you out of the way, and you kept going, whoever was left. And whoever survived at the end got crowned, all their money, and the rest of their life was taken care of. It was called The Long Walk. And, I think, what was that? There was a game, an Arnold movie. I know Richard Dawson was the host. Anyway, it was a game like that. So I wonder if what we see on the field will be completely different now and be all virtual. We'll be in the metaverse, maybe meta football, right? We'll take our goggles and we'll be on the field, and maybe we'll have shock devices, and, that we'll get punished if we do something bad. So I'm just wondering if that's where we're going, a virtual fantasy based on history, and then where we can be the players.
Yeah, I could see something like that too, and reminds me of that one. Can't think of what that movie is called. Ready Player One. I didn't actually watch that yet, but that seems like what that's all about.
There you go.
Okay, so with the last question here, give the listener of the show some parting fantasy gridiron knowledge nuggets, wisdom, we'll call it, through the lens of the science of fantasy football.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Besides a diary, which I think is essential, you've got to know yourself. There are lots of books that allow you to understand how you make decisions and why, and you need to at least consider what's going on. I would do a lot of background work, a lot of, drafting. I use best ball, cheap best ball leagues to get practice. They have some on, I play a lot on FFPC. They have something called $5 best ball teams. So, you can take $50 and play, draft 10 teams, and that gives you background and, keep track of, the ADPs and that kind of thing. So I use best ball as a method to kind of get my game ready for my redraft later in the summer, right? I'm certainly pay attention to the combine and the rookies and whatnot. And I've got some data on all that, metrics for rookies and these kind of things you can check out. But I would play best ball, definitely a diary. I would play best ball. I would do mock drafting. But best ball, I think, makes it real because there's something on the line and it makes you focus versus some of these mock drafts. People draft two and then they're gone and you're just playing against the robots. And so that would be my wisdom there. I don't know if, and of course, check out my material on DMike at scienceoffantasyfootball.com. I guess that would be it, Artie.
There you go. A scientific approach to fantasy football. Who would have thought science could be cool, right? If you're interested in John's work, head over to scienceoffantasyfootball.com. If you'd like to learn about this show and our other guests, head to fantasyfootballoriginstories.com. And don't forget to leave us a rating and review on your podcast player of choice. And believe me, you'll want to make sure that you're subscribed or followed or whatever else your app calls it before the end of the week. Because next week, we have another awesome guest on our show. If you're listening to a fantasy football podcast, I'm pretty sure you know who this guy is. Next week, we have Matthew Berry to ride shotgun in the DeLorean with us to take us back in time to learn about his fantasy football origin story. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through. Thank you for listening to this episode of Fantasy Football Origin Stories. To make sure you're the first to get the next episode, please make sure to mash that little subscribe or follow button on your podcast player of choice, then head over to the website for the show notes and more fantasy football origin stories. That's at fantasyfootballoriginstories.com. And remember, dudes, where we're going, we don't need roads. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.